Welcome back to the CPA Revolution. I'm Charina Padilla here with our tax strategy expert and co host, certified tax coach and CPA Jose Ortiz. If you are tired of traditional reactive CPA advice and want to turn taxes into a wealth building tool, you are in the right place. Hi, Jose. Good morning. How's everything going?
Good morning. I'm great, Charina. How are you doing today?
Doing great, doing great. I'm very excited about the topic that we'll be discussing today.
Yeah,
I know that you agree with this statement that most tax problems don't start with the IRS, right? They start with us. So
yeah,
long before the numbers ever hit the return, the real issues are already built into the structure or sometimes missing from it, right? So I've seen
exactly.
it over and over again. High earners, business owners, and entrepreneurs who are working hard but flying blind. And I've heard you say
Yeah.
this so many times. So I want to dive in and ask some questions and see how you structure and train, coach your clients on some of these things to make sure that they are set up for success.
Yeah, and this is a little bit different from obviously talking about tax strategies directly, but this is so critical, right?
Mhm.
So this should always be before you even start thinking about tax strategies is have you thought about, the mindset and all
Mhm.
these kind of things that we're going to talk about now?
Well, let's dive right in and tell me a little bit how you would explain talking about tax problems and
Mhm.
starting before the numbers do. What does that really mean? And what do
Yeah.
you have to say about that?
Absolutely. So most people think that tax problems happen at tax time, right? When the
Hmm.
return's being prepared. But the reality is that those problems start months and even years earlier. So, the real issues begin when someone's unclear about the life that they want to build for themselves, their roles in their business, the role in the business, that plays into that life, and then the habits that they need to be able to support to have that life. So when you don't have that clarity, you operate kind of like reactively, right? And that's why you go to a CPA who's reactive, and they're able to help you and whatnot. But for someone who's just more proactive and strategic from a CPA standpoint, you want to kind of already have that mindset, kind of, or working on getting that mindset, right? So reactive decisions, they always kind of show up in the numbers, right? So when I'm kind of looking at prior tax returns, you can kind of see what's happening. By the time we
Mhm.
see those tax returns, the story's already kind of like been written, right? So that's
Right.
why I always talk to my clients about this kind of things and kind of try to see if I can get them in that mindset so that it's a little bit easier for them in the future.
So what I'm hearing you say is that the numbers may be fine and okay, but their direction is not clear. And when there's no clarity, every strategy becomes reactive.
Or both. They might think about it is they might not have that mindset because obviously, to be fair, we're not taught that growing up in at least here in the United States. But then also there's a misunderstanding, right? So people don't understand how critical, right, the systems are to their business and the systems are to their tax planning and all this kind of stuff. So while even if they do have a vision, even if they might have goals, well, if they don't have systems, there's really nothing.
It's like with everything, it all starts with design. You need to design how you want your life to evolve. And the same thing happens with your financial picture, right? So the
Exactly.
structure behind the savings, the tax planning, it
Yeah.
starts way before, right? When we want to buy a new property, we start thinking about what type of property, where do we want to acquire it in? Like where would we love to, set some roots, whether it's a personal home or an investment property. So it all starts with design and knowing exactly what we're trying to accomplish before we start running our cards and creating more expenses.
Exactly.
Yeah, so why do so many entrepreneurs struggle to define their life goals, not just their business goals?
It's kind of like what I said before. I don't know if we're necessarily in the society brought up to kind of think that way, right? Most people were taught to set business goals before they ever thought about the kind of life that they actually want. They'll
Mhm.
chase revenue, they'll chase clients, they'll chase growth, but they don't stop to ask if any of those things support the well-being or the life they're trying to build, which is kind of crazy, but this is the way it works. There's also a lot of noise, right, out there telling entrepreneurs that they need to hustle like all the time and do all those kind of crazy things. So they end up building businesses that don't necessarily match the lifestyle they want, which obviously then, in the future, they kind of get maybe maybe, that starts showing up in their lives a little bit. They're not satisfied. They don't feel accomplished or whatnot. But I think when your life goals aren't clear in general, your business goals really won't make sense either, right? Because
Right.
it's kind of like you have to have those four legs on a stool, and if one's gone, then it's not going to balance.
For sure, for sure. And at some point in everyone's life, we all go through this process, right? I guess
Yeah.
it's what I'm doing right now taking me closer or away from my actual goals. So it's
Yep.
definitely something that's common for everyone, whether you're making 500,000 or you're making $50 million. We all go through this phase at some point. So what do you
Absolutely.
look when you assess someone's mindset and their vision, their readiness for tax planning?
Yeah, like when I'm looking at that stuff, it shows up in the form of, I mean, really inconsistent decisions, right? So, someone who lacks clarity, one month they'll want to scale, the next month they're kind of just trying to survive. They might hire quickly or they may not hire at all, which that leads to all kinds of other problems because then, you're one-stop shop for everything in your business. Their bookkeeping, it falls behind. They forget to track the important items that may lead to deductions. And then tax planning never really becomes like a cadence or a rhythm.
Mhm.
All of that kind of creates like a messy set of data, which leads to missed opportunities. And then
Mhm.
eventually the tax return just reflects a year of unclear decisions. A lack of clarity becomes a business problem, right? And then it
Mhm.
becomes a tax problem.
Have you run into like any situations where you see someone that they really don't have a clear path? What are some of like the typical struggles that you see that are pretty apparent?
It's just
Besides what
that.
you just mentioned, I know this is kind of like the same question, but in a different format. But I want the audience to really grasp on the idea that, these signs, whether it's fear, whether it's lack of clarity, whether it's, missing purpose, like how is that showing up in
Yeah.
the accounting side of their life, right? Their records.
Yeah, unpreparedness, really. If I had to say one word, is just they're completely caught off guard by a lot of things, right? So that tax bill comes in, they're caught off guard. They didn't have a plan for it. They weren't thinking about it, right? So they're really unprepared, not only in that sense, Serena, but also to take advantage of opportunities, right? So
Mhm.
they're not positioned to strike. They don't have that gunpowder, right?
Right, right.
So it makes it really, really difficult to kind of then take advantage of things. And like that's the whole thing. If I'm working with somebody, it's because they have a vision, and I'm basically
Right.
working off of what they do. So if their vision is to have X and X by so many years, 3 years, 5 years, whatever, that's what we're working towards. So you can imagine if you don't have all the right things, the right foundation, right?
Mhm.
How that could go wrong. I mean, we could work towards a
Right.
goal, but then all of a sudden I noticed, hey, what happened to your bookkeep, right?
Right,
Things
right.
like that.
Yeah, and it all starts obviously with the design and the planning, but the execution is very important as well. And tracking is what makes it work, right? So we've heard about KPIs, key performance indicators, right? So if
That's
you're
right.
not tracking your progress, how are you going to know that you're actually making progress, right? Whenever
Yeah.
you get, to your next goal, like I personally use this for my vision board, where it's like if I know I reached that goal, I'm taking that piece of paper down and I'm putting it in a scrapbook. So I
Yeah.
remember where I came from, right? So those days where our energy is a lot lower, our mindset is not fully at full capacity, we could say, hey, by the way, this year has not been so bad. I accomplished all these items and now have a new goal to reach. What are the steps that I need to take to make sure that I'm tracking progress to make sure I am reaching that specific goal? And
Exactly.
sometimes that's not very clear to many entrepreneurs. And
Yeah.
I've struggled. I have a
Yeah.
good friend of mine who's a life coach, and she always says, stop talking about vision boards, start talking about action boards, right? It's a
Okay.
vision with an action. If you don't have an action attached to your vision, then it's not a vision. It's
It's
very hard to
worthless.
accomplish, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, I definitely love how you always position the concepts of accounting and records keeping and all of that is important. But if your mindset is not aligned, then it's gonna be a lot difficult to reach those goals and make sure that you stay on track to reach the next level.
Yeah, I talk to clients and prospects, and then they'll tell me, hey, but I want to save money on tax. What can we do? I want a tax plan. So
Mhm.
then I'll do a diagnostic, and then I say, hey, you got to fix your bookkeeping. Okay, what about tax? No, no, that is your tax plan right now. That's your tax plan because it's like how am I? We can't build anything off of something that is not solid, numbers that we can't trust, you know. And I think I've told you this before. It's like if we compare it to like a personal trainer, right? Personal trainer, you go, you know, work out with him. He'll teach you everything. He'll teach you the form and do all that stuff. But then you go back home and you start raiding the kitchen, right?
Mm,
And then you go back to that coach and he's going to tell you, well, dude, you know, abs are made in the kitchen. You know,
mhm.
you want to see your six pack? Abs are made in the kitchen. Well, to me, bookkeeping in this sense, and bookkeeping are your abs. Those are your
Right,
abdominal muscles, right? So obviously, abs are made in the kitchen, meaning you have to kind of do everything necessary. And I know it is not, you know, your cup of tea. I know it's not something that's inherently, you know, that come naturally to people. But this is something like if you're going to play this game, you got to be on the court.
right,
If you want
right.
to be a business owner, you got to be on the court.
Or make sure that you bring in the resources to be able to assist you in those areas where you may be a little weaker on, right? Like
Exactly.
hire a bookkeeper. That's going to be a huge return on investment. You're going to buy time and reduce stress by having someone solely focus on those items.
Exactly.
We can't scale up if we don't get away from that scarcity mentality,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
there's something that you've already identified that you struggle with, try to find help, ask for help. You know, maybe there could be someone in your team that may be able to take that over. And if you're a one person business, maybe you want to hire an assistant or a bookkeeper that can work, you know, a few hours a week to make sure that your records are maintained. And then that's going to give you the opportunities for growth, for expansion, for investments, you know, you name
Yeah.
it. So
Yeah.
it's just about, again, putting those items in place to make sure that you're fully supported.
Yeah. I guess, you know, if I were to say anything, if I were to like to just create like a little short summary for people who are listening at home, right? First, you have to have the vision, right? Then you have to have the systems. Those are kind of the way it works. I would actually say even before that, I put mindset, then vision, and
Mhm.
then the systems, you know, and I call that operational readiness. So that's what I
Right.
would say, you know, because when I do this stuff, I look for those three things. You know, when I'm talking to a prospect, I want to know their mindset. How do they view
Mhm.
money? How do they view responsibility? You know, how do they believe that they actually can design their financial life? Some people don't.
Yeah.
And then, you know, the second thing I look for is their vision, whether they have a clear picture of the life they want 3 to 5 years from now. You know, Charina, I was talking to a couple, married couple, prospects.
Mhm.
They're doctors. One's a surgeon, the other one's a pediatrician doctor. They both have their own practices. So I asked them, hey, so what's the vision for you guys? Crickets. So, and you know, this is somebody that you would suspect would kind of already had that plan. I mean, for God's sake, they went to medical school, you know? So that's what I mean. And then, you know, the third thing is the operational readiness, like I was telling you. Are they willing to create? Okay, maybe they're not, you know, they're coming to me because that's exactly what they want. But are they willing? Here's the thing. Are they willing to create the habits and the systems that are going to support those goals? So it's like you said, you know, we all have our days where we don't feel 100%. We don't feel motivated. Okay, when you can't show up, are your systems showing up for you? Right? So when all three of those things are lined up, tax planning is going to become simple and more powerful. If any one of them are missing, then we have to address that first.
I love that. I love that. And the moment we stop waiting for the perfect time to start building real systems, everything changes. Our
Yep.
book, our decisions, and our results. So
Yep.
I always say the real secret to tax savings isn't a loophole or a strategy. It's the actual structure that you're set up with.
Exactly. It's just building that stuff up. And, you know, like a lot of people don't expect that from a CPA. So I'll tell, you know, and I'm a systems kind of guy, as you know.
Mhm.
I feel kind of lost without it. So, you know, they'll kind of not expect that coming from me, but it's just something that's so important. And to be honest, I can't believe any other CPA would not require that.
So I think that wraps it up for us today. I think clarity is the number one item, like you said, and having that vision, plan, structure, and being able to keep track of all those items is what's going to get you to the next level. So
Yep.
if you need ideas, any tracking worksheets that you can use, feel free to reach out. We'll be happy to customize something for your needs.
Yep. And in my article that accompanies this video, I talk about systems and acronym.
Mhm.
Systems stands for save yourself time, energy, money, and stress. That's what it stands for. And to be honest with you, that's exactly right. You know, that's how you kind of, if you're able to scale, that's how you're going to do it.
Beautiful. Well, I hope to hear some success stories on how you've been able to scale after you have implemented tracking systems in your business and also in your personal finances. And look forward to seeing you at the next session
All
of
right.
the
Take care.
CPA Revolution.
All right. Take care. We'll talk soon.